Sometimes I'm surprised that even after 30 years, I can still lose myself in a sketchbook. And yet, it seems to happen at least once or twice a week. At this point, I was spending some time in the gallery, sitting and wondering if anyone was going to come in on a cold winter day. And so, of course, the logical thing to do was to draw some robots. So here we are. I'm throwing down some lines with my pencil. I have no idea what's going to happen, but of course this thing needs a snake's neck. And I kind of just found that 30 minutes had gone by. I'd continued to cover up the page, to work on things, to ink slowly, to jump back and forth between the different media, but time just seemed to evaporate. This is one of the most beautiful things about drawing in general, and maybe in particular about sketchbooking. I didn't intend to use that as a verb, but it kind of has become a thing. In my youth, sketchbooks were primarily a place of retreat, some place that students, myself of course included, would sequester themselves when life became too much. So many of us as artists are plagued with being introverts in an extrovert's world, and a sketchbook was often a really easy solution to that problem, something we could dive into and invest time into in a way that felt productive, and that often our parents wouldn't hassle us as much because it seemed like it was probably better than playing video games. So it was just this place of safety and security that I could find myself, and that many of my friends did as well. Sketchbooking, though, seems to almost be a modern thing. I don't remember growing up ever seeing someone who would complete a sketchbook and the sketchbook itself was a piece of art. I have tried to do this on several occasions. It's very popular on here and it's very popular on Instagram, but it's really stressful. And it just seems antithetical to what a sketchbook always was for me, which was the opposite of that, a stress-relieving thing. So if that's the purpose, at least for me, then trying to turn the entire sketchbook into a piece of art seems like a bad idea, for lack of more sophisticated terminology. Though I still have a desire to do it, I've just decided that these sketchbooks that I generally pick up, which are 70 to 100 pages, are probably not the best subject for that. So I'm going to start moving in a direction sometime in the near future on 30 and 50 page sketchbooks, which I will work on with the intent of having a singular object. I think that that's a fun thing to do, but if it's the only sketchbook you have, I think it's a terrible idea, and I will stick with that. I think that part of what's so wonderful about sketchbooks in general is the fact that they allow us this constant retreat with low expectations. And this little robot guy is coming out of these low expectations, and it's fun. But let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about expectations. How dangerous they can be for us as artists, and yet how necessary they might also be if we're trying to make any real progress on something. This drawing, for example, has no expectations for me, other than the fact that I am going to attempt to draw a robot. The reason that I shy away from sketchbooks that are a single piece of work is because the expectation is that every single page will contribute to that overall whole, and that's asking a lot. A sketchbook might take you 50, 60 hours to move through, and that's a lot of time to be at the peak of your performance and to make sure that everything is going to turn out correctly. But expectations are a necessary and integral component of our art making, though they are also terrible in their own right. Our expectations are often what lead to our disappointment. When we try to make a piece and it doesn't turn out particularly well, it is the expectations that tell us that it didn't turn out well. Otherwise, we'd look at that thing, we just go, that turned out as a 8 out of 10. If we weren't anticipating or hoping for a 9 out of 10, then it's just a thing and it doesn't matter. And that's okay sometimes. Sometimes it's okay to work in that realm. Conversely, though, the expectations can also help guide us. They can help push us in a way that is really beneficial. And though we risk some of that vulnerability of hoping that things can turn out well, which I will be covering in a podcast either before or after this concerning hope itself. I believe it comes out before this. If that's the case, I will throw it in the description down below. It is reasonable and good to have hope about what things can be and how things can turn out. But that's really just linked in this sense to our expectations. So I guess the big thing is, don't let your expectations be this amorphous thing that you don't know and you are not anticipating. It's no problem to have high expectations for your work. In fact, if you're aware of them, they can be really, really beneficial and they can help you move in particular directions. Your expectations seem to be the most detrimental when you don't know what they are, when you don't expect them. And then you hit the end of a thing and you just find yourself disappointed. And at that point, you probably don't even know why. You hit the end of a drawing or the end of a project and you go, what happened here? Why were my expectations not met? Why am I so upset about this? And usually it comes from expectations that you didn't know, you didn't understand, or you didn't anticipate. So understanding your expectations can not only help you get closer to whatever your goal is, but it can also help you avoid those tragic moments where you find yourself not wanting to work on art for the next couple days because things went so poorly. This is something that is probably a more ethereal concept for many artists, and something that I think I deal with naturally because I have a tendency to overthink everything, but also because I had the fortunate reality of working with middle and high school students for 11 years. And when I got to see thousands of pieces of work every single year, I got to deal with a lot of students who were disappointed in projects and assignments that I would look at and internally would go, you don't have any reason to be upset about this. This turned out really well. This turned out really well compared to your past pieces, not just as its own thing. And yet those students were often so upset about how things went. I came to the conclusion over many years of chewing on this, of talking to students, of talking to other teachers, that this is primarily coming from unmet expectations, obviously, but unmet expectations that were not known by the person who wielded them. And that's dangerous. This has also become something that I try to be really, really aware of in my life now, not just artistically, but I try to be aware of each day. Like, what are my expectations for this? Sometimes even cooking a meal, if I find myself disappointed, I can kind of look at things and go, oh, this wasn't adventurous enough. This wasn't interesting enough. It's just spaghetti sauce for the 3,000th time in the last 10 years. And of course, it's still delicious, but it's not doing something for me that I needed it to do. Sometimes for me, cooking is a really exciting and fulfilling thing. I love doing it. But I don't always like cooking the same thing all the time. And so I get disappointed when something turns out well because I didn't want to do it in the first place. And sometimes this is exactly what we experience with our art. Sometimes that painting turned out well, but you weren't really sold on that painting topic or the subject matter at the beginning of it. So you never had a chance of it being something you were okay with. So work on understanding your expectations before you jump into a project, before you jump into an assignment or a study. If it helps you, write them down. You could do this in a place where nobody would see it. It's one more reason to have a sketchbook that's just for you. Or you could even do what I did in high school, which is create my own language so I could take notes on things that were emotional or embarrassing and nobody else could read them. This doesn't need to be something you share. I don't share all of these thoughts. I share some of them because I hope that it's beneficial to you who are listening. But I don't share everything. It wouldn't be productive. And it would be a little bit arrogant to assume that everybody wants to hear all those weird internal thoughts. But be aware of your expectations. It's going to take some time if it's not something that you've done in the past. But if you start thinking about it right before you sit down to draw that manga girl, right before you sit down to draw that muscle-born, souls-born character, if you sit down and really think about the desire that you have going into the drawing, you're going to uncover what your expectations are. And you can really quickly then assess whether they're rational or not. If you just got started on figure drawing and your expectation at the end of this study session is that you can draw a male figure from imagination with no reference, that's an irrational expectation. Now, if you're a beginner, you might not know that that's an irrational expectation, but as you start to build up your skill, as you start to move forward, you will understand what is rational, what you can expect, and what you shouldn't expect. Now, I do think it's also beneficial to take a moment and talk about having higher expectations for yourself as well. I've had a lot of students over the years who had very low expectations for themselves. They expected very little, and in turn, they achieved less than they would have otherwise. And even when they did succeed, they were either surprised by it, they felt like it was a fluke, but they didn't take as much joy in it. There's a lot to be said for seeking that Aristotelian mean, to try to come to the middle, to have expectations that are rational for yourself, to have hopes that are higher than that, and then also to be gracious with yourself with the reality that not every drawing is going to turn out well. From my perspective, though, none of this happens if you're not aware of yourself, if you're not aware of your nature and how you're thinking about things as you move through the pieces. So much of this comes down to understanding yourself. I know Adam Duff of Lucid Pixel talks a lot about know thyself, and it's super important, but it is super important. The better that you understand how you function, what your nature is, where your expectations come from, and what they are, the longer you'll be able to stick to this, and the better the work will be. And I think what is most fundamental here is the more enjoyment you will get out of that work. And joy is a fundamental component of this. Keeping your expectations in a rational place, a place that is not too high or too low, but is reasonable and crafted by you, leads to a higher joy quotient in your work. And after all, joy is probably why we got into this in the first place. So if we can increase that joy, that's a wonderful thing. Well, as always, thank you for listening. I would love to hear about your thoughts concerning this topic in the comments below. If you would like to leave them, I will happily read them. I still read every single comment on these videos, and I would love to see what's going on in your life with your expectations for your work. If you would like to take a look at our Discord community, we are building an awesome artistic community there for feedback and critique on each other's work, but also just for a space for us to rant and ramble about the things that are important to us. Thank you to Patron Who, What, Where, When for their support, and if you would like to support this channel as well, you can check out the Patreon in the link below. Have a good one, y'all. See you soon.